Do I want to record a video about saving legacy? No. Do I need to record a video about saving legacy? Yes. Hello folks, Phil Gallagher, aka ThrabenU here for another legacy video. And rather than gameplay, I thought it would be really useful to talk about Eternal Weekend, the data that we saw there, and kind of get everyone into a healthy mindset regarding bans as we approach our December 16th banned and restricted update for various formats. And I think we know that changes are coming for Legacy. And the question is what and how much, how many cards are going, and a lot of people are starting discourse about what they think should be banned. And I want to try to give a bit of an objective take on the format before sharing some of my own opinions on what maybe we should be doing to fix the format's health. So that I don't have to interrupt this video later, let me just say that this video is sponsored by two groups. Number one, TOAmagic.com. Tales of Adventure is an awesome store. I buy things from them. I sell to them. It is great as far as customer experience goes. Promo code ThrabenU will save you 5% on your order. You always get free online shipping. And beyond that, today's video is also sponsored by Moxfield.com. If you are interested in probably hundreds upon hundreds of legacy deck lists, check out my Moxfield profile. I link to my Moxfield in every video description, and there's a lot of cool stuff there. So without further ado, why don't we start talking about Eternal Weekend? So a quick disclaimer here. When I say Eternal Weekend for the remainder of this video, I am referring to the North American Legacy Champs that just happened with 1,155 players. This is just absolutely a massive event, an order of magnitude bigger than most other Legacy events that we are seeing be run. And I really want to put perspective on these results. The Legacy challenges that you see on Magic Online on any given week might have like 32 to 50 players as a general ballpark. In the grand scheme of things, those are basically local level events, although the caliber of player in them tends to be relatively high. So when we are dealing with this 1,000 plus player event, we generate a shit ton more data than we do on any given weekend from things like legacy challenges. And I think I want to start by talking about the deck that just absolutely stole the show, and that is Mystic Forge combo / the One Ring combo, artifact combo, kind of whatever you want to call it. And this deck is particularly notable for this weekend as it put 3 copies into the top 8 with a relatively absurd win percentage as well. I'm going to get the exact statistic here. 61% win rate. And for those of you who don't follow win rates super closely, a good deck might have, a 52 or 53% win rate on a tournament of this magnitude. And when you start getting to a 55% win rate, that's where you're like raising an eyebrow and going, oh. And when a deck has a win percentage like that over a period of time, that's when you really start thinking about, like, do we need to manage the format via bans? And a lot of people in the last really 48 to 72 hours as of the time of my recording. I'm recording this on Tuesday, November 26th. A lot of people recently have started talking about how they might want a Vexing Bauble ban for Legacy, because decks that look like this traditionally are relatively soft to counterspells. If you assume that your opponent has one counterspell, then you need 2 different haymakers in order to win the game. The first one kind of serves as your bait, and your second one actually gets to resolve. Whereas what can happen with this deck is you just have a turn 1 Vexing Bauble, turn 2 Grim Monolith, play a key, slam a 4-drop, and your opponent's counterspells never had any ability to stop any of this stuff. And some people are saying that the play patterns associated with this are just not healthy. Legacy is a format where combo decks should be able to be checked via counterspells. Force of Will, Daze, to a lesser extent, newer counterspells like Force of Negation, your Fluster Storms. Cards like these, generally speaking, should be able to check a combo deck. And Vexing Bauble is making it so that combo decks, and it's not necessarily just this one, so that combo decks, generally speaking, can use Vexing Bauble as a shield, and you can push your combo to resolve using Vexing Bauble. Sometimes we are even seeing blue decks play Force of Will and Vexing Bauble to just have those extra degrees of redundancy in being able to force combo through. I have played a lot of Vexing Bauble on this channel, and I have won a lot of games with Vexing Bauble. I think Vexing Bauble is perfectly fair when you are using it to combat an opposing combo deck. I think it's perfectly fair when you are using this to resolve some giant creature that might be vulnerable to something like Daze. When Vexing Bauble is used in a combo deck to shut off all opposing, not all, most opposing interaction on turn 1 to not guarantee, but make it very likely that a turn 2 combo hand can succeed, that's a little bit scary and potentially format warping. And I want to put this deck's success into the context of Legacy. In current Legacy, most blue mages are packing roughly 3 copies of Consigned to Memory in their sideboard. Is this for this deck? Not necessarily. This is often targeted specifically at the Eldrazi deck list, and this deck is as successful as it is despite blue mages already playing one of the most efficient hate cards possible for this deck list. And Urza's Saga provides this deck a way to consistently find Vexing Bauble. If your opponent is trying to settle in for a longer game because they are playing something like, say, a Jeskai control deck or a Bug Beans deck, if they are not pressuring your life total, you can wait them out, put a Vexing Bauble in play, and then start playing your relevant cards where their interaction is likely to be less efficient. Null Rod is another card that you can use to target this deck specifically. Well, let's see whether or not Null Rod is going to fully stop this deck. With the newer technology that this deck has to offer, you can do something like Karn, pick up a portable hole, and then you have a tutorable artifact that you can cast off your limited amounts of white mana that can go and get rid of a Null Rod and allow you to continue doing your thing. You can also just do a Glaring Fleshraker combo with Kozilek's Command through a Null Rod. If you have some modest amount of mana, let's say that you have 6 mana, you can still do a Kozilek's Command for X equals 4, dig 4 deep, more accurately, scry 4, potentially looking at 5 different cards, to either find your next Kozilek's Command or some other piece of business, another Glaring Fleshraker, while doing something else relevant. And this deck could also just beat you down with Urza's Saga. This deck is maybe scary. It's not like Mystic Forge came out of nowhere. This was absolutely a deck that was on everyone's radar. But the win percentage data from this weekend is just so damning for the power level of this deck. Shoutouts to Matt Chow, who did a lot of the number crunching for the numbers that I'm currently talking about. So this deck bullied UB Reanimator. More on that deck in a couple of minutes. At a 72.5% win rate. So the deck that many people perceive to be the best deck in the format got bodied by this. 66% versus Moon Stompy. 78, really 79% versus Eldrazi Stompy. 76 versus Painter. 61 versus Nadu. 63 versus Cephalid Breakfast. The only two decks that it had trouble against were Doomsday and a Jeskai Control deck list, but our matchup sizes for those aren't necessarily the highest in comparison to some of the other things. So, for example, we have 40 games versus UB Reanimator, whereas we have 7 versus Doomsday. So the data there is slightly less reliable. But generally speaking, what we saw with this deck is just an absolutely massive win percentage versus everything else that is a top deck in the format. So, before we even start talking about something like Psychic Frog, it may be that this deck is actually out of line by legacy standards. It is not all that difficult to play a 4-drop on turn 1 in this deck list, given the power of Grim Monolith and untapping it. And when you get to play the One Ring, Mystic Forge, Karn, whatever on turn 1, you're probably winning that game. Or if you do it turn 2 uncounterably, that's fine. This deck has a ton of ways to generate obscene amounts of mana, such as Planar Nexus lining up with Urza's Tower, Ancient Tomb just being Ancient Tomb, Urza's Workshop tapping for a ton because Urza's Tower, Urza's Saga, and Planar Nexus all count towards it. This may be a deck that actually ends up needing a ban from it in some capacity. And if you start trying to ask the question, well, what do you ban from this? I think it's a little tricky. You could take something like Glaring Fleshraker that has some overlap with Eldrazi, and we'll talk about Eldrazi in a couple of minutes. You could take Vexing Bauble, which is perhaps a problematic card in multiple different deck lists. This card is seeing an absurd amount of play. You could take something out that has been hit in other formats, such as the One Ring, which I think we all know is kind of a cracked card at this point. And when you can start playing it on turn 1, and it just like becomes possible for, a mull to 4 of like Ancient Tomb, Lotus Petal, the One Ring to be a winning line, that's maybe not the most healthy. But let's transition into talking about our other colorless deck now. Now, there's a little bit of variety in what exactly the Eldrazi deck looks like right now, but you are looking at something approximately like this. The deck is way different than it used to be. So if you are used to the play patterns of old Eldrazi, where it's like very much a stompy deck, like play a lock piece, play multiple large Eldrazi, attack and crash in, that's not always necessarily the game plan anymore. The deck can be a Glaring Fleshraker Kozilek's Command combo deck list, just like the Mystic Forge deck can. But frequently, the deck is just looking to play a couple copies of Sowing Mycospawn and wasteland you into Oblivion. Sowing Mycospawn represents something pretty unique for a Magic card, even in the Legacy card pool, and that is the ability to destroy multiple lands at the same time. And notably here, these are on cast triggers. So you are probably not stopping those on cast triggers most of the time. Meaning that this deck can uncounterably tutor up a wasteland or whatever other utility land they need at any given time, be that a ton of extra mana or the ability to make all future Eldrazi uncounterable. When you can be this deck that has a non-combat combo finish while also being an amazing resource denial deck list that also has a respectable endgame, potentially from multiple different angles, it's kind of hard to hang with this deck list. I don't necessarily know that Eldrazi is one of the absolute strongest things going on in Legacy right now, but when you are trying to keep up with the raw speed of current Legacy, you are trying to have to keep up with A potential pseudo combo kill on turn 2 with this deck, or at least the setup to make turn 3 very, very easy. And you have to do that through Vexing Bauble, while also living in a world where you might not have lands for very long, while decent sized creatures can beat you down. And the spells don't even necessarily need to resolve to have a massive impact on the game. So, in a couple of different ways here, counterspells, which are one of the backbones of this format, are being checked by these Modern Horizons 3 cards, which either say you can't use counterspells, or, at least to some extent, it doesn't matter that much if you do have the counterspell, because I am still going to go and get value from my spells, even if you do counter them. So, for example, a Null Drifter that is cast always draws those 2 cards, even if you counter the 4/4 Annihilator 1 body that is attached to them. As far as Eldrazi's results from this event goes, they were very, very polarized, with some very bad matchups versus things like Moon Stompy and Dimir Tempo, and some very good matchups versus things like the Bant Nadu and Cephalid Breakfast decks. Moving on. I want to talk about Nadu now, and I am going to talk about Nadu as a big overall concept here. It's not the most genuine to just talk about Nadu as a single deck. These are 2 different deck lists from our Eternal Weekend results. So this is a Bant version of the deck, which kind of focuses around utility and the ability to be able to tutor up exactly what you are having, while also having some alternative combo finishes with natural order. So there is one Nadu deck that looks like this, and a second Nadu deck that has Nadu as redundancy for the Cephalid Illusionist and Nomads in Core combo. But why don't we start over here with our Bant Nadu deck. This deck is pretty scary, fast, and consistent. You're often dealing with some number of Birds of Paradise, Noble Hierarch, or Delighted Halfling to power out a Nadu. And this deck can just immediately get a combo kill, and sometimes you don't even have to work that hard. Like, frequently your Nadu deck might just be going and drawing 8 cards or something like that, and then passing the turn. With this deck, if you can start doing your Nadu thing and just get to a natural order, you can just do something like tap Gaia's Cradle, natural order into Hoof, and you just have a combo kill. If your opponent stops you from doing your Nadu thing, and you still just have a green creature around, cool, I have natural order for Atraxa to refuel. So when you are trying to fight against this deck, you are trying to maybe counter opposing spells, and sometimes your counter spells aren't going to work because of something like Allosaurus Shepherd or Delighted Halfling. And if you spend other resources on like this Nadu stuff, sometimes you will just get out mid-ranged by Springheart Nantuckos, or there is this alternative combo finish in natural order as well. And when you get to this deck, this is a deck that can Goldfish on turn 2. Just turn 1 Nomads, turn 2 Cephalid Illusionist, and you die. And it's not all that scary for them to just attempt that, and if it doesn't work, cool, that doesn't really matter, because you have 4 Nadus, 4 Cephalid Illusionists, 4 Nomads in Core, some number of Shukos beyond that. This is an incredibly redundant combo deck list. This one can very easily just literally win the game on the spot by doing the Cephalid Illusionist or Nadu thing. And Thassa's Oracle, traditionally speaking, is a very hard card to stop. If you are playing a Nadu deck that has Force of Will and Swords to Plowshares, even if you don't fully combo off, like let's say you're in some sort of awkward world where you have like Nomads, Nadu, and a Narc Amoeba, and you're not able to fully combo off, well, guess what? If you draw 6 cards on your turn and 6 cards on your opponent's turn, you are probably just also winning that game, right? So in addition to having to deal with these very fast colorless decks, these incredibly fast Nadu decks are also a part of the format. And Nadu is literally a design mistake. Like, we know that the card as it is printed, as you see on the screen here, was not tested. There was a last-minute development change that resulted in this card going to print with slightly different abilities to kind of compensate for a play pattern that they wanted to happen in Commander, I believe. And the result is we have not one, but two different, incredibly powerful and resilient and fast combo decks in Legacy built around Nadu. And then we have the boogeyman of the format, our blue-black Reanimator deck list. The linchpin of this deck working is obviously Psychic Frog, which is a card that should have been banned a few months ago, but here we are. I think it is very, very close to a foregone conclusion that this card will be banned on December 16th. So I'm not going to linger too long here. Psychic Frog is not just the core of this deck list, it's basically the core of most blue decks in Legacy right now. Whether you're a tempo deck or a control deck like Bug Beans, or a combo deck like Blue-Black Reanimator, a combo deck like Doomsday as well will often be playing these. If you are in the colors blue and black, it is probably a mistake to not be playing Psychic Frog. The card is just that good. It messes with combat, it is a discard outlet, it is evasive, it draws cards. There's a ton to like here. So, in terms of Eternal Weekend results, Dimir Reanimator ends up at a positive and good win rate, despite every single person in the room knowing that this deck is the deck to beat. It ends up at a 52% win rate. It's about 14.5% of the metagame, with 168 players of that, like 1,150 players, being on the deck. And it has a pretty large number of top 32 appearances. This deck is a little out of line by the format standards, and taking Psychic Frog from this deck is probably not enough. You know how we took Grief from the deck? And I was kind of screaming into the void, like, you need to take Psychic Frog too, or this deck is still like tier 1 and a problem. Well, that happened. And I think we are in the same position again, where if you don't mess with this deck more than just Psychic Frog, this just gets rebuilt ever so slightly, finding some new card advantage, some new threat, and we still have this same problem. When the best tempo deck is also one of the best combo decks, / also one of the best control decks, if you kind of count the tempo elements here as being controlling, that's not great. And sideboards are currently so incredibly fucked trying to keep this deck in line that occasionally you will see things like Ghost Vacuum making their way into main decks, or Surgicals making their way into main decks even. I ran into that in some leagues. And that is not a sign of format health. And an issue here is that these various incredibly fast decks that we're all talking about have a fundamental turn of like turn 2 or turn 3 at the latest. Yeah, let's just go into that real quick. So this is a deck that literally can kill you on turn 2. Nomads into Cephalid Illusionist. Eldrazi might not literally kill you on turn 2, but they have the potential to have absurd Eye of Ugin turns on turn 2. So you could do something like turn 1, land drop, turn 2, Eye of Ugin, Glaring Fleshraker, cast a Lotus Petal, and then potentially end up doing something like a Sowing Mycospawn immediately afterwards. And while that doesn't literally end the game, that is often enough of a swing that you don't come back from that. The Mystic Forge combo deck list is very frequently going to have a fundamental turn of turn 2 where it gets far enough ahead via the One Ring, or does enough Glaring Fleshraker nonsense or Grim Monolith on taps that they probably just win the game. This Nadu deck list probably has a fundamental turn of turn 3 on average rather than turn 2, but on turn 3 they are threatening Nadu combo and also threatening Natural Order, and that's a lot. Blue-Black Reanimator just has Entomb Reanimate as a line, or Psychic Frog with one or more counterspells back up as a line. And current Legacy is so incredibly fast And why don't we use this as a point to transition into talking about just the nature of the format right now? So I think when we have a healthy legacy, we have a ton of different viable strategies. And those viable strategies cover kind of all of the different ranges of deck types. And right now, in Legacy, we have an incredible range of diversity. That is checking that first box. There are a lot of viable decks in Legacy right now, but Legacy is so skewed towards combo right now, and Legacy is so fast right now. This is perhaps the fastest Legacy format that I have ever experienced, in that we are expecting games to be fully decided on turn 2 or turn 3 in many, many, many cases. We are not expecting to ever really settle in for longer games. Sometimes it happens, but the expectation is that people are going for win attempts incredibly quickly. And what this means is that we have ended up with no real control deck in the metagame to speak of, at least not one that is particularly successful. It is so hard for a control deck to be able to cover all of the, frankly, bullshit that is going on in Legacy right now. Like, you're trying to simultaneously deal with artifact-based combo, creature-based combo like Nadu, spell-based combo like Reanimator that happens to have a large creature attached, but the spells are the major portion that matter. You are trying to cover all of these bases while your counterspells are being shut off, or your opponents are accelerating so quickly that even highly efficient removal like Swords to Plowshares is not necessarily keeping up. So, for example, if your opponent plays a Glaring Fleshraker in the same turn that they play a Sowing Mycospawn while also wastelanding you, like, yeah, your Swords to Plowshares removes that Glaring Fleshraker, but your opponent is still very far ahead on mana and will likely climb further and further ahead as these turns go on. And we are in this situation where combo is what is viable in Legacy for the most part. And the creature decks that are around also kind of have a combo finish in some way, be that Natural Order or Nadu or Glaring Fleshraker with Kozilek's Command. Even the Moonstompy Red Prison style deck lists have kind of their own combo finishes, in that a broadside flinging a fury or broadside broadside can just kill opponents, or copying my Pyrogoyf can just kill opponents. Decks that are just trying to do anything remotely fair have just disappeared from Legacy. So in the top 32 of Eternal Weekend, there are no creature type decks. None of the goblin, the merfolk, the humans, just nothing of that general nature is around. Even highly successful fair decks like Cradle Control are just not present in the metagame at this high level event. The reason is that many of these fair decks just can't keep up with all of these combo decks. So, for example, there was a great Death and Taxes finish. There was a D&T top 8. But Death and Taxes as a deck overall had a 48% win rate over the course of the weekend. And that's not super great. Death and Taxes is not included in the matchup matrix that I currently have available to at the time of recording. But historically, from what I've heard, the deck is just stone cold dead to Nadu decks. And if there are two different, somewhat popular Nadu decks running around the format that can just outspeed everything that they are capable of doing, why would you want to be registering Death and Taxes in that world? I think Legacy is healthy when people are interacting and can interact with opposing spells. In our last banning period, we lost Grief from the format because Grief was one of those things that was just generically stopping all interaction. And we are seeing tons of other ways, mostly Vexing Bauble, to just stop opposing interaction from working so that you can just do your thing. Legacy decks are not looking to have a sword fight. Legacy decks are right now looking to punch each other and see who punches each other harder. And the person who punches harder and faster wins, rather than it kind of being a nuanced duel of jockeying for position. And I think this is a very bad thing as far as format health goes. The things that are viable in current Legacy are largely combo decks. And so many strategies are being pushed out of Legacy because they simply cannot hang with the speed of all of these other things that are up at the top of the format right now. Like, yes, we have a handful of viable decks, but I think the way that all of those decks are viable is perhaps unhealthy. All right, now we're going to get to the good stuff, and we're going to go into actual ban recommendations and figuring out what the fuck we actually do with this format in its current state. I don't think current Legacy is in this is so bad I am going to quit the format mode. And we have seen that mode a couple of times in previous years with things like Oko just across the board obliterating tons and tons and tons of archetypes and or like mega archetypes, just entire swaths of the field just became unplayable to one singular card. But I don't think the format is healthy. I think if you are playing Legacy very casually, there's still plenty to like about current Legacy. And I think if you are only concerned with wins in tournaments, there's plenty to like about current Legacy. But I think if you are anywhere in the middle, you are probably not particularly enjoying this current Legacy format because I think there are some inherent health issues with it. And let's go ahead and go back to our decks here. So recommendation number 1 is that Psychic Frog needs to exit the format. The blue-black X decks of the format right now just have this Omni tool, this fucking Swiss Army knife that does everything. It is bigger than most fair creatures that can be played out, even the ones that cost maybe 3 or 4 mana. It is invalidating combat. It has evasion. It is card advantage while also serving as a combo outlet for these Reanimator decks. I think this one's got to go. I think it is not a hot take. Should have gone previously, but we need to eject it from the format for now. Recommendation number 2. I'm going to keep this one more vague. Another card needs to leave this blue-black Reanimator shell. And I don't think I'm smart enough to know which one. I think the clear suspects here are Entomb and Reanimate. And there are, I think, good arguments for both. The argument for Entomb is that this card is not particularly replaceable. Entomb is unique in that it is the 1 mana way to consistently get exactly the card that you want into graveyard. There is a 2 mana version of this card, but the difference between 1 mana and 2 mana is massive, absolutely massive by Legacy standards. And if you need to go 2 mana enabler into turn 3, reanimate a thing, that is totally fine within the context of this format. But the format is not necessarily supporting Entomb plus Reanimate on turn 2 being a thing, but the deck can also just beat down with a Psychic Frog that can singularly win the game. However, there are also valid arguments that Reanimate should be the card that goes instead, because this is the most mana efficient version of what it does. If you get rid of Entomb, Reanimator as an archetype is very close to dead. It is so much harder to build a legacy viable Reanimator deck without this card. You can do it, but instead of being one of the absolute best things to do in the format, it probably starts to enter the this is my pet deck tier. This is the thing that I want to play, not the thing that I am playing because it is, very, very, very good. So you do kill a bit of legacy history if you junk Entomb. If you junk Reanimate, you can make the deck rely more on Metamorphosis Fanatic, which does require some setup, or force the deck to play more 2-cost black cards. and just kind of decrease the overall efficiency. When you can just Entomb Reanimate, a lot of times you have the ability to play around an opposing daze or use a daze to stop your opponent's first play while still kind of doing your thing. And I think either one of these things is perhaps acceptable. I don't know that I am sold on one of them being more correct than the other. This is one of those times where I would very legitimately enjoy thoughts in the comments section, preferably well articulated thoughts, because it wouldn't really surprise me if someone from Wizards starts going through videos like this one in the not too distant future, looking for kind of what people have to say about this decision in particular. Opinion number 2. Something from this Mystic Forge deck needs to go. The deck put up absolutely absurd numbers at Eternal Weekend. Certainly ban-worthy numbers, and the deck has a pretty rich challenge history beyond that, in the hands of some players. Like I think Jujubeen was one of the players playing this and doing particularly well with it. I think if we only address something like Psychic Frog, the metagame might not be able to adapt to this. Like, again, if we are already playing tons of copies of Consign to Memory and a decent number of Null Rods, does moving up one Consign and one Null Rod in your sideboard because you have a little more sideboard space because Psychic Frog and Reanimator are gone, like, is that really enough to keep this in check? I don't know that the answer is yes. A lot of people are calling for Vexing Bauble as the card to go, citing the fact that this is not really being used as the way it is intended to stop unfair things. It is being used to protect unfair things. And I think that is a very good argument. I am unsure whether or not I would pull the trigger on getting rid of Vexing Bauble. This is a card that I have enjoyed a lot as a player. This is one of my favorite Modern Horizons 3 cards. Like, given the gameplay patterns that I tend to want to do, this has been great for me. But this may ultimately be an unhealthy card. So my recommendation here is that Vexing Bauble should be examined as a card that may be threatening to format health. This is one that is currently on my shit list, but it's not in the stack of cards that I would necessarily advocate banning for. But if it goes, I'm not sad. I think it is reasonable to ban Glaring Fleshraker from this deck. If you lose Glaring Fleshraker, the power of Kozilek's command goes down so much. Glaring Fleshraker is a thing that allows you to just win without using the combat step in any capacity. It just allows you to be this combo deck, and it allows you to play a super true win condition light game. So if we take a look at the sideboard here, like as far as the stuff that Karn can wish for, like you can Mycosynth Lattice your opponent out, but it's not like there's another win condition here, right? Like you could win by locking your opponent out in some capacity, be that destroying their lands, making the combat step not matter, but there's not really a win condition there. So overwhelmingly, this deck is winning via Glaring Fleshraker combo. Like this is the thing that is physically killing people in most cases, although your opponent just right-clicking and conceding or just bashing you with your Urza Saga tokens is viable as well. This is a card that I would personally be looking at getting rid of. If one of our goals is to lower the overall speed of Legacy and the consistency of some of these decks, hitting Glaring Fleshraker has the upside of also damaging the Eldrazi deck, but probably not killing the Eldrazi deck, right? Like there are perfectly reasonable Eldrazi that are not currently seeing play in this deck. Again, the Reality Smasher type cards. You have the, I've totally blanked on the name of it. Like there is a green Eldrazi that makes a Eldrazi Scion token. Like you have options here. So as far as these colorless decks go, Glaring Fleshraker is the card that I would point to at this time. I think Vexing Bauble is a very valid alternative to what I am suggesting here. And I don't think it is crazy to axe the One Ring. This is a card that has relatively unhealthy play patterns, and we've seen this card dominate other formats like Modern in a very very damning way. And if you get rid of the One Ring, the power of these Voltaic keys and Manifold keys goes down a lot as well. And maybe if you don't have the One Ring, then Glaring Fleshraker becomes less of a problem as well, because you just have less ability to line up Glaring Fleshraker and Kozilek's Command without just the absurd card draw that the One Ring offers. Recommendation number whatever we're actually on. I think that Nadu should probably be removed from the format. In terms of tournament results, tournament data, and that sort of stuff, I don't think Nadu at this time is currently a problem. But I think as soon as you remove some of these other things, as soon as you nerf some of these other things, I think Nadu becomes one of the absolute best things to be doing in the format. Like, if you hit this other stuff and you just leave a deck that can turn to Goldfish relatively easily while also having a really good degree of redundancy, I think this ends up being a problem. There are multiple different ways that you can build around Nadu in ways that are somewhat difficult to combat. I think the gameplay patterns around Nadu are rancid. There were a lot of complaints on the Eternal Weekend floor of having to like sit and watch your opponent Nadu combo, because like you could be live for a win if it makes it around to your own turn. Like, things can happen. But even if the Nadu player doesn't successfully combo off, drawing 6 to 8 cards over the course of their turn and your turn is often enough to just win the game, even if they don't literally win on the spot. I think current Legacy has a playing with itself problem, where the Nadu decks can capitalize a massive portion of the round clock, and the Mystic Forge One Ring decks can do the same by repeatedly untapping the One Ring. When I am currently recording Legacy videos, I will often literally just mute my microphone, walk away from the stream for 5 minutes, go take a pee, go refill my water, and my opponent will often still be comboing when I return, and I won't have missed anything that is particularly important. And that sucks from a user experience perspective. If major portions of the metagame are going to be eggs-style decks in Legacy, it's going to be really hard to pitch people that they should continue to play Legacy. It is often a very, very intricate format with tons of decisions that are relevant and matter, but it's not like Show and Tell Emrakul or Alurin quickly demonstrate a loop where it doesn't actually take all that long to physically kill your opponent. Like, I have, in some cases, sat there for 5 or 10 minutes without making any meaningful decisions while my opponents did their combo turns, and that's not great. So Nadu is something that we might just want to get rid of, because we've just eliminated that from a bunch of other formats already, as it is literally a design mistake. And I think user experience goes up a lot if we get rid of Nadu, while we also just eliminate one of the things that might just immediately pop up here as one of the new best decks. Now, the next thing that I want to just kind of make sure is clear here. What I am advocating for is a heavy-handed ban wave that lowers the overall power of the format. I do not believe that it has to be the exact cards that I was just talking about. But I do think if we want a healthy, interactive Legacy where a greater range of things actually ends up being viable, like like having control actually be viable in the format, I think we need to lower the speed of the format and not make turn 2 our fundamental turn. The issue here is that if you go with just something like a Psychic Frog ban, I think we just keep this incredibly fast-paced metagame where the average F&M deck can't really hang with the stuff that you're going to be doing there. And while I don't necessarily want to fully balance the Legacy format around F&M, as, that is just one one subset of the people who are going to be playing Legacy. I think we need to respect, the average Legacy player who has bought into a Legacy deck. I think they should be able to show up to an event and have a reasonable shot at going 3-2. I think that is kind of, no matter what you're playing, you should be able to show up and you have a decent day, you play okay, you should be able to 3-2. Maybe when you show up with your burn deck or your merfolk deck or your human deck, you're not expecting to 5-0, you're not expecting to beat everything. But if every deck in the format is, I kill you on turn 2, I kill you on turn 2, I kill you on turn 3, I ignore your interaction because I have Allosaurus Shepherd or Delighted Halfling or Vexing Bauble, and I kill you through your interaction. I beat you through your Fairy Macabre that you specifically sideboarded in to beat me. I don't think we end up with a healthy Legacy format without kind of hitting a couple of nails that have popped up. And I think if we just try to keep playing this ban one thing, wait and see thing with Legacy, we are going to be dealing with largely Modern Horizons, powerful summer set style cards, making Legacy play patterns not great for years. All right, and I want to end this sort of video essay here, whatever you want to call this, by talking about productive discourse. I think that many people, when they do ban discourse, are convinced that they are correct, that they know something that Wizards doesn't, they see something that other players don't see, and they kind of get tunnel visioned into this is exactly what needs to happen for the format health. And I hope today that I have shown, even as someone who is playing at minimum 5 leagues a week of Legacy, who is regularly in touch with other, absolute giants of the format, I don't even necessarily feel like I have all of the answers here. So I encourage you, when you are, kind of stating your opinions, like, back them up, support your reasoning, but make sure it is productive. And I had a funny set of tweets next to each other on my timeline, and I thought I would share this here. So Kelvin here is the person who went and won Eternal Weekend with Mystic Forge. Quote, my goal going into EW was to get Vexing Bauble banned. I have given that my best effort with my play. Now it's time to make my case. I am happy to appear on any Eternal Magic focused podcast as long as I get to lay out my case for a ban. Retweets appreciated. When you go and win a tournament, a big tournament, and you say, this card is fucked up, I think that is providing, some good evidence, and I look forward to seeing what they have to say in the coming weeks. And I really like something that my podcast Brian posted, podcast co-host Brian posted, quoting that previous tweet. Eternal Weekend 2024 winner, playing a Mystic Forge combo, declares Vexing Bauble is broken and needs to go. Call back to when Eli Cassis won an SCG Open with Miracles, then looked directly into the camera and said, I'm telling you to ban the deck that I just won with. And I think when we see people who are doing well with a deck go, hey, this is kind of fucked up, this is probably not healthy, that might be a sign that we need to critically evaluate the cards in question here. And this is the point where I'm going to ask for some engagement. Not to boost my own video, but because I am legitimately curious. Like, please lay out your ban thoughts in the comments down below. It can be as long or as short as you want, but I am very, very curious because people are coming from all walks of life on this BNR update, and there are some wild takes out there, some of which the data supports, some of which the data does not support, and I'm legitimately interested. I hope this was useful to you all in kind of helping you to frame your own thoughts for what you would do if you got to kind of push the button and change Legacy. I am for some heavy BNR updates, like let's give us a big format mix-up. Let's try to get the speed of Legacy down a little bit. Let's slow down these games. Let's get some more interaction. Let's make the interaction work. I think that's all I've got for you. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. See ya.